Hi, Sarah, and everybody. Thank you for having me today. I'll just share my screen so I can take you through a bit of a PowerPoint presentation. This is my journey as an accidental map maker. I'm not qualified in this area, and I came about creating maps because I love them. So that's why I call myself an accidental map maker. So it all started when I travelled around Europe and America as a young backpacker. I collected these beautiful illustrations of cities that I visited. Some were old, some were new. And for me, it was a way of moving around a city and visually working out where I was. And when I came home, they were souvenirs of my travels. So when I did arrive home, I looked for an illustrated map of the city where I live, which is Melbourne. And I came across this beautiful illustration by Samuel Calvert. It's an etching, actually illustrated by Albert Cook, and then made into an etching. This appeared in the Illustrated Australian News back in 1880 to celebrate the building of the exhibition buildings. And the only other up-to-date illustrations I could find were ones that were produced back in the 30s. And both were really beautiful, but they didn't represent the city as I saw it and that I wanted to share with other visitors to Melbourne. So I went about creating a map of my own. I did a course at Monash University on putting business plans together and understanding a little bit more about business and how to get a project off the ground, and then adapted this business plan to my map idea. I met with quite a few potential illustrators because that's not my forte, and I finally met a woman called Deborah Young. Back in the mid-80s, I saw an illustration that she had made for a friend's birthday party. So at the party, I talked to her about the map idea and asked if she would be interested in joining me in working on the project. So luckily she said yes. Started collecting a whole lot of information and reference material for the map. So we took 7,500 photographs of Melbourne, and that's back in the day when you had a camera and film, and then had to send it off to a pharmacy or a business that developed them, wait up to a week, and then we would sticky tape the pictures together and file them in this very sophisticated filing system here. And Deborah would use those as reference photos. I was also able to fly in hot air balloons over Melbourne. So I did 12 trips altogether with a fellow called Chris Dewhurst, who owned the company. And at the time, he was the only pilot that was allowed to fly over Melbourne. And whenever he had a spare space in the basket, if someone didn't turn up or had a cancellation, then he'd call me up very early in the morning. I always would have my camera, a whole lot of rolls of film and clothes beside the bed, so I could jump out and just meet them. And usually you had to meet them about 5 o'clock in the morning before takeoff, and that could be anywhere around Melbourne, and it flew anywhere over Melbourne, so it was never predictable, and I would just take photos of wherever I was flying that day. And then Deborah and I worked in this garage at the back of my mother's house for the next 3 years, working on the illustration. So gathering information from the photos we took, some aerial shots that we were lucky enough to get, but there was no such thing as Google, and it was a lot more difficult to get the information. But it meant that we drove pretty much every street in Melbourne, and we got a feel for the city, and we talked to a lot of people about what we were doing. We started to invite people over to our studio, and this is Facebook in the 80s, or that's what I call it. People would show their face in our little studio, and then they'd write in our book, and the messages that they wrote gave us the confidence that perhaps they'd buy the map at the other end, and we were encouraged by this, and it was a lot of fun. So the project was going really well, working nights and weekends, and it was funded by my part-time job. Well, no, it was working full-time at the moment, but it was part-time. And I asked Deborah if I could raise enough money, would she consider leaving her full-time job and work on this project full-time? And she was happy to do that. She was working for Maya as a design draftsman. So mainly she was drawing shelving units and displays for the store in Maya. So she was happy to work full-time on the project. So I took my business plan along to the bank, and they gave me a $50,000 overdraft at 22.5% interest. So there's a lot of talk about interest rates at the moment, but back in the late 80s, this is what we had to grapple with. So took that loan out, and Deborah started working full time. And by 1990, she'd finished this magnificent illustration. And we went through the process of having it printed. We had to import some rag paper from Italy, find a printer that would actually print it on their printing press. And the original was first photographed, and then we got the film from that. The printer printed it. And at the time, we just started hitting the recession of the 1990s, so people weren't spending as much on limited edition prints. We were able to sell quite a few just to keep head above water, and we found the power of the press. So we had a little bit of media coverage in some local newspapers, and we also went on radio. So we managed to sell quite a few prints, but overall people kept on asking us when was the colour map coming out, so we knew that we would have to colour it at some stage. So I handed the drawing over to another couple, Heather Potter and Mark Jackson, and they updated some of the buildings and took off the aeroplane that we had on the very first illustration. And they hand coloured the drawing again over a period of about 6 months. It was the original was photographed again, and then it went to a screen printer who screen printed on beautiful watercolour paper for us, just a few copies of those, and then handed one copy over to Heather and Mark. They had to put this 7,500 jigsaw puzzle back together of all the photographs, and then use that as reference for the colour. They did a magnificent job, and this was our end result. Again, no opportunity for mistakes here. So if I didn't like the colour blue of the water, that was too bad, but they just did an awesome job of the whole illustration. And then I went back to the press again, because I had actually taken it to the printers, gone through all that process, had it scanned on a scanner, which was new technology back then. It was a drum scanner. It could only take like an A4 size, so we had to have the map photographed, and then the photograph negative was then put on a drum scanner, and it took, I think, about 12 hours to scan it and cost $2,500. So today we would just put it in our flatbed scanner, and that would take 30 seconds and probably cost a couple of dollars. So things have changed since the days back then, but we were just part of that emerging technology then. I took the proof to a distributor, because back in the day, that's how maps were, or any artwork was actually produced or sold, was you'd sell them to a distributor, then they would sell them wholesale to all the poster shops, and the poster shops would then retail them. And this distributor, sat back in his big chair and said that he'd take on 100. And I figured that if he could only sell 100 prints, I should do it myself. So went back to the press, and I approached the Age, showed them the drawing and the final print, and they came back to me and asked me if they could print it on the inside front cover of the Age, in combination with a celebration of Melbourne's history. They did that in February 1992, and it was just an incredible experience. We sold a lot of maps, thousands and thousands and thousands of the maps. People sent checks to us, and we banked those, and then were able to slowly pay off that. What I had then was about an $80,000 overdraft. But it was just magnificent because we got to meet most of the people that bought the maps, and went on then to produce a jigsaw puzzle. So at the time we could make puzzles in Australia. Sold probably about 12,000 of those. Dabbled in cards, postcards and greeting cards. And then in 1996, I moved down to the Bellarine Peninsula with my partner, and we started an abalone aquaculture farm. So I became a fish farmer, from a map maker to an accidental fish farmer. That's another really long story, but I'm no longer involved with the farm. But this is where I stored all my map stuff. So we had a house down on the Bellarine, and I got a big garden shed, and I put all my leftover maps, jigsaw puzzles and all sorts of stuff, memorabilia in there. It sat there for the next 15 years, gathering dust and cobwebs, and I'd been out there many times to try and clear it out. I went out there in 2015. I said, this is the day. But instead of clearing it out and moving things on, I got all swept up in the joy of map making again. And I went back to the computer, and I had a look to see if there was any maps of Melbourne had been done since the time that we published in 1990. And not only could I find nothing new of Melbourne, I also couldn't find our map of Melbourne online. So I posted a couple of photographs on Facebook and Instagram, and got an amazing response. People said, I used to have that map, have you done another one, etc. So I realised if I was online, I had to learn this complete new language. And I was a little bit nervous about trying to start the business again and learn a process of making and selling online. I saw this book in a bookshop, and I didn't read too much of it, but I liked the heading, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. So I mortgaged my house and left my full-time job at Back to Back Theatre, which was a wonderful job, but I felt the need to do this map again. I assembled a team. Lewis Brownlee on the left there is the chief illustrator. Deborah, I spoke to her again, and I wanted her to be involved. She wasn't able to do the whole drawing, and Lewis he thought it would take him 3 to 6 months to complete. And it took about 3 years, 2.5 years of him at the easel full time. Deborah did some character illustrations, and then we combined all those together. He started off drafting up the streets. These videos go on for a long time. I'll just keep on whizzing along, but basically just drafted up in blue, and then we did it in pencil, and then just marking all the streets and the areas that we had to explore and take photographs of, and just sort of laying out the draft of the drawing. And then one by one, Lewis would then complete the blocks in detail in pencil. And then and again, this time, of course, we had a digital technology. That's a screenshot of the iPad on the left, and so it was much easier than the first time, but also at the same time we felt we had to put more detail in because we had access to that detail. So then Lewis started inking the map, but by this time I'd spent the $100,000 that I'd borrowed against my house, and I went and started a crowdfunding campaign, and that's me, hand on heart, telling people that the map would be ready by the end of the year, but it actually took us 1.5 years after that to finish it. So we knew now that people were excited about the map and that they'd support it. I think we sold about $120,000 in that crowdfunding campaign. Lewis kept on drawing. We combined the two illustrations together. Had a couple of exhibitions in the city, which were pretty exciting. Lewis was in the front window of a shop and drawing and creating some excitement about the project. We moved into a new little studio in Geelong where it was finished. These are just some of the little illustrations that Deborah did along the way that we combined with the drawing. And we finally finished the line drawing in November 2018, so we could fill all the orders for the black and white limited editions and posters, but we still had to do the colour process of it. And this is what my life turned into, back into Mum's garage at a different house, but just packing maps and posting them off and keeping on promoting and keeping on pre-selling and working with Sean Rodwell, who is an artist in his own right, and multi-skilled, and just met him by accident and asked him if he would be willing to colour the map. He said yes. It might take him 4 to 6 weeks, but it actually took 6 months. But he did, again, an incredible job and very accurate colouring. We finally had a poster of the map finished in August 2019, and published a Can You Find list, some information to go with it, did a lot of social media, and then went on to do a jigsaw puzzle and a calendar. This was all towards the end of 2019, and as you know, after that, COVID hit. So we barely had time to actually promote the illustration and the poster. But very soon I swung into pivot mode like everybody else did. I'd ordered some jigsaw puzzles from New Zealand. Australia doesn't make jigsaw puzzles anymore, so I ordered these jigsaw puzzles from New Zealand to be made, and they arrived December 2019, and they sold quite well. So I ordered a 40-foot container instead of a 20-foot container. And then COVID hit, and I just had so many orders for jigsaw puzzles, I could hardly breathe. Worked from 7 o'clock in the morning till midnight, just about every day in customer service, telling them that I'd posted the jigsaw puzzles. Some of them, went up to Sydney before they were delivered back to Melbourne. It was chaotic, but it was very exciting, and we had some great exposure in the Age. So busy doing jigsaw puzzles, making a living, and paying back the bank all the loans that I'd taken out, which was just amazing, getting great exposure, and enabled me to put funds back into a map of the Bellarine Peninsula, which is where I live, and had always wanted to make a map of that area. Deborah has visited, had her holidays in this region for all her life. So it was a real passion project, and we went on basically the same process, just researching, photographing, drawing in between lockdowns, and drafts and redrafts and changes, and then scanning and editing. Finally did a black and white drawing of that, and then again back to Sean, who also lives on the peninsula in Port Arlington, and he spent 5 months colouring, and we completed that project in November, which has been an absolute joy to share with the people that live locally. And we've gone into production of jigsaws again, but this time with an Australian manufacturer. And we've dabbled in beach towels and tea towels, which are also made locally in Melbourne. And we just continue to make nice quality Australian-made products that we share with whoever we can via our website. So I'm keeping it brief today. I could talk for ages on the project. I'm really passionate about it, but this just gives you an overview of our project. And if you've ever got any questions, just contact me via our website, themelbournemap.com.au, or on Instagram or Facebook. Okay. Thank you very much for having me, and and I'll answer any questions later on. Thank you.